by printing the pamphlets, he was using a modern technology to spread reformative ideas. He wasn't necessarily relying on word of mouth, although that is certainly how it spread as well, but he was using a technology that had just been recently developed to help his Reformation spread. And that's a very important thing, because Martin Luther utilized printing in a revolutionary way, because the Catholic Church was not happy about this. The Catholic Church did not approve of his new ideas or his condemnation of the church. And yet that didn't slow him down, because he was able to print. He found business partners, printers to work with, and who knows if these printers agreed with him or not. Perhaps they did. However, they were able to print his material and spread it. And in some places it's even called propaganda. And in many ways you can see perhaps why that might be, villainizing the power that is in charge, and spreading a new idea. It's just very interesting. And Luther also worked to print a New Testament in German. So he was also part of that group that wanted to get vernacular language more widely accepted and used. And these common language texts were more widely readable and understandable to all people. And in this context, it was huge in the realm of religion and power. Martin Luther was able to kind of slide seeds of doubt throughout Roman Catholic believers and reform people and change their ideas through the words that he printed, through the ideas that were spread because he was able to write them and send them, versus having to rely on word of mouth, which perhaps would have gotten it wrong. We've all played the game telephone. So it's just a very interesting thing to consider. And I do believe that huge events like this, huge religious shifts like this, many of which happened after this time, are thanks to printing, and major ideas were able to be shared and spread through printing. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the further power shifts that printing saw. Now, printing is certainly by no means the cause of war or the reason that people fought, but the ideas that were spread through it can certainly be pointed towards that. And this is a picture of a scene of battle in the War of the Roses. And the War of the Roses was a pretty down and dirty political battle. Edward III's descendants on two sides both wanted to come into power, and it was not apparent which side had the right to the throne, and so there were small battles. And while not many common people in England were affected by this, some people were, including William Caxton, because he was a merchant, and one of the sides, the House of York, was certainly more in tune with the needs of merchants and businessmen, and so he sided with them. And for a while, it did appear that the House of York would obtain the power when one of the prominent people in that family did reign as kind of the temporary king while the true king was sick. it ultimately ended and it didn't come to anything. However, I think that it's important to see how business and power work together. And printing is a business. And so Caxton had a side in the war. He had a side that he wanted to see victorious because he was a smart businessman and he wanted the best policies in place for himself. And I believe that's true today. Even still, those who write, those who produce content, in general, appreciate political power that allows for creative freedom. You do not see very many creative business people, such as those on YouTube, or those such as authors, or those who produce content that could be considered dangerous or could be considered risque. They want power. They want people in power who support their freedom and their creativity. So I think that's interesting. I think that the War of the Roses, in that sense, while it was not caused by any sort of reasons that printing can be linked to, it certainly had an effect on the printing world, and it certainly, as we can see through Caxton, it certainly affected the people who were in the printing business, or at least worried them. However, the Peasants' War in Germany in 1524 and 25, I think can be more directly related to printing. After Martin Luther's ideas had spread and were gaining traction, and people were starting to see the corruption in the Catholic Church, they wanted freedom, and they wanted to break free from the role that society had placed them in as peasants. And so they revolted, and they rose, and they wanted to fight. They wanted their freedom. Ironically, Martin Luther did not support them at all. In fact, he opposed what they were standing for. He did not intend his writings to necessarily stir up political strife. He more or less was hoping that it would strike people religiously, and that's it. But it's interesting because regardless of what his intentions were, the fact that he wrote something that stirred people and the way they interpreted that and took that and used it as their inspiration to uprise, printing allowed that to happen. Widespread pamphlets, widespread books and ideas allow people to interpret and be inspired by things that maybe the author didn't intend, but it can happen, and I think that that's important to note. Printing, that was certainly an effect of printing, and good, certainly, because being able to express these ideas and being able to revolt certainly seems like a very natural human right. Lastly, I want to talk about the art of printing. Many people, just as they do today, whenever there's a new technology that threatens to dethrone an old way of doing things, people were afraid that printing would take the beauty out of bookmaking. However, it didn't. It didn't at all. And printing allowed for creativity to rise in other ways, and allowed for beauty to show through in different ways. So one of the ways that I believe it did is what you can see here. This image is a printer's mark, considered one of the very first printer's mark by Fust and Schoeffer. And it was a mark that was intended to show that that printer or those printers worked on that book. And the beauty in it and the accuracy of it was from that print shop. That's important. People were branding themselves in the 15th century. People were saying, this is my work. If you want more of it, look for this symbol. Brands are crucial today. People oftentimes will have brand loyalty, and I believe that the same was probably true back then as well in the 15th century. These in books, as I mentioned in the first presentation, books were also embellished and illuminated even after they were printed. Some books, such as Caxton's, were not. They were very simple. However, others were still being decorated, and even today, some books are very beautiful and very well decorated. I think also this period, this kind of shift, this in-between period of having a very beautifully illuminated manuscript to having what we have today, which might just be a $2 paperback at a used bookstore. This kind of in-between time, I think people began to really consider the content part of the art of printing. It wasn't just the way that the words looked on the page or the way that the page was decorated. That was certainly part of it, and today it may still be somewhat part of it, but I do believe that content, this was the rise of content, that content could be beautiful along with the form, along with the way that the book was put together and the way that it was used. And the diagrams that are found in Incunabula are beautiful. They are hand done, used, so artists would use exemplars, which an artist who had the opportunity to go travel would print, would draw and create these exemplars and show people how to draw these things of nature. And they're beautiful. It's no art was lost when printing came to be. And in fact, as I have stated, I believe that a direct effect of printing is a wider range of the way that printing can be seen as an art, or the way that books can be seen as art. They can literally be pieces of art. At Temple University in Philadelphia, there's actually a collection of art books that are not just books, but the book itself is a piece of art. But it can also be that what the book is, what the writing is a piece of art. The content is art. And without printing, without the rise of printing, that wouldn't have happened. None of that would have been possible, because people would still be handwriting Bibles or handwriting other religious texts and not focusing on creating new content and creating new forms of expression. So that does it for my presentation on the effects. You can go ahead and play another Kia game at the end of this blog post. Once again, I have included more pictures and a little bit more explanation for some of these things on the webpage, and at the bottom is a link to the Kia activity, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have learned a lot. Thank you.